Yeah, hope is a word that seems a little far from reach right now, but there I do see some shimmers here and there. We can only do as much as we can do. So the next question I have for you is, what do you believe about the people who voted opposite of you?
Well, again, I think the Latino voters that went across the aisle because they felt abandoned by the Democrats, by those that voted for Trump. They basically, I think, must be also Fox News listeners. And then even the main media, four, five, and seven, they don't ever tell us any information. They hide the things that are really going on and keep us entertained with other stuff.
Right.
But then I'm really just ashamed in a way. So many Latinos voted for Trump. But Latinos are a very conservative part of the population. They're anti-gay, they're
That's right.
anti-abortion, and Mr. Trump comes across with that machismo shit. Just the thing is that machismo died in Mexico. Okay, we have a woman president now,
Right.
and the previous president had 80% approval of the people. When have you ever heard a president in our country have that high in approval? And why is that? Because he focused on the most needy people, to help them because they've always been neglected by the conservative party of the pretty, who started out as a revolutionary party, but was in
Mm.
power for almost 60 years. And they were no longer the party of the people.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, so I mean, right there's world is changing. That is for sure. What do you believe about the people who voted opposite of you?
Well, I believe they're totally uninformed of what's going on around them and what's going on in this country specifically. Obviously, like I say, they listen to Fox News more than likely. But that conservatism, I think, is what makes it appealing, or that's why Trump appeals to them because of the anti-abortion and anti-gay. But
Right.
that's kind of like after all the stuff he said about Mexicans, I can't believe that they voted for him.
Right.
But when I was like 8, 9 years old, still living in Texas, I would hear Mexican. The little town I was in was all Mexican. Okay, oh, here comes a wetback. Well, what were you, buddy, when you came?
Right.
You were two. Well, the thing is, sometimes people want to assimilate. A lot of Latinos want to assimilate. And if they're light skinned, they want to be like a white man in this country. That's a big problem.
Well, I mean, that's a brilliant point, and I'm glad you brought that up because when you are, I mean, it's the internalized oppression. It's the I've been I've seen people like me, and I've been beat down so much by a ruling class that all I want to do is appease them, right? And it's like that's operating out of fear, and it's not operating out of anything that was is beneficial or wholesome to the soul. You know what I'm saying? So that's a good point. I'm glad you said that, and yeah, because I can say the same for some of the black folks who voted for Trump, voting against their own interests, not excusing that. But I think that the economy was a big issue for people. And I mean, it's expensive to live in Washington State. You shouldn't why.
Oh,
And like, I went to New York. New York is almost 50% cheaper. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, I mean, my motto living here is that I need to make more money to live here instead of prices need to come down because I come to the realization that that's just something that likely won't ever happen. I think.
well, capitalism is all about exploiting and oppressing and making money.
Right.
And when people blame the rural area, white people have been neglected,
Mhm.
and I can see that and understand that. But when they don't understand how capitalism works and how back in the 70s, people were starting to leave this country to go overseas so they pay lower wages and make a higher profit. And when we go to war, usually it's to protect the multinational interests abroad.
That's right. Interesting. Okay. So the next question I have for you, Juan, is what is the worst thing about society to you?
Oh, I think the worst thing is these mass shootings that are going on, the violence and mass shootings that are happening in this country. And I mean, I never had to learn or have a drill to learn how to hide under a desk or someplace because a mass shooter may be committed. And to me, however, back when I was a little kid in Texas, I was singing Confederate songs without knowing it.
Sure.
And back then, of course, if you were Mexican and spoke Spanish in class, they'd wash your mouth out with soap. Who kids wet with their pants because they didn't know how to say, "Can I go to the bathroom?" You see a puddle under their chair. I mean, I used to walk around towns because my parents were farm workers and come to towns where I say, no Mexicans, no blacks, Mexicans or dogs allowed. Period. So I come from that environment since a little kid. But when you're a little kid, you don't think about those things. You don't think about and dwell on them. Why are they doing that? What's the reason behind it? The other problem that I am concerned about is white supremacy in law enforcement. I'm not saying that we don't need police. And we do need police. And we want police that do the job that they're supposed to do, and that's to serve and protect. Unfortunately, BIPOC communities do not feel being served or protected. So, and how you address that once they're in already, it's difficult because they have rights as government employees. I mean,
Yeah.
here we have Adam Fortney, who ran for a constitutional sheriff, who ran for a re-election and lost, but now he's back on his job. So we have a white supremacist constitutional sheriff working out there in our county, still employed. And so, and this is why when I talk to members of the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, I always bring up the fact that we need to figure out a way to address white supremacy in law enforcement. Because they don't care what the law is or what they're supposed to do. They go and do their own thing. And of course, the blue line protects and backs each other. It covers for each other. And that's the big problem there, too. So we need transparency and we need accountability. Those two main things, because there is no trust in law enforcement from your community and my community.
Yeah, I'm sure you're thinking about this too, because as a country and really as a local community, we made a lot of progress in the last 10 years or so in police accountability. But every time there's some progress, right, when it comes to legislation at the state level, it gets rolled back to some degree. Yeah, I mean, is there any hope for equal enforcement of the law?
Well, I had lunch today with a woman by the name of Betty Frizzell, who was a chief of police in Missouri. She comes from Missouri, but she lives here in Seattle now. And she was in a panel of police chiefs when I had the June 29th event here at the Carl Gibson Center, where we brought in police, community advocates, and legislators to talk about the culture of policing. And if we can't change that culture, things will continue the same. And to me, that's why I supported Susie Johnson. I did a fundraiser for her, and I also did a victory celebration party for her as well. Both of those events had 90, 100 people. But because in my conversations with her, even before she ran or decided to run for sheriff's position, we talked a lot. And I said, look, if you will hold your deputies accountable, and make sure that they implement the use of deadly force to the letter as the legislation was passed in 2021, and that you have transparency and do things that will help build trust, then I will get support for you. And she's no, I totally agree that that's needed. And so, I mean, she's a woman with integrity, okay, and that I think speaks highly of her. And I hope that she's got a tough job, Louis, because Washington ranks fifth in the nation in white supremacy activity, and so is ranked number one. Pardon me?
Can you say that last part again?
So Washington State ranks fifth in the nation in white supremacy activity, and our county ranks number one in the state. So in essence, we rank fifth in the nation in our county.
Right, right.
And that's according to the Anti-Defamation League, which tracks these things there.
And your point though, because you got the connection broke a little bit, but you said Susie Johnson, her integrity, and then you said the white supremacy statistic about Snohomish County.
No, I supported her because I knew that by his own admission publicly said he was a constitutional sheriff. He disobeyed the governor's order on masking. He allowed white supremacists to take over the city of Snohomish with the AR-15s and AK-47s, flying the Confederate flags. Mm-hmm. So now there's a bill in the legislature that's called the Sheriff in Chief's Eligibility Bill. In there as language that will prevent that from happening again, because see, it has to be anybody who is a chief, a marshal, or a volunteer has to be, if they're going to do peace officer duty, they have to go through the academy and become certified. And those volunteers obviously were not certified and went to the academy, but they were recruited by Adam Fortney.
Right. And for those who don't know, what Juan specifically referring to is Adam Fortney was a constitutional sheriff who did not enforce the state's mask mandate for the COVID-19 pandemic. On top of that, he and his departments were, I don't want to say they totally in collusion, but there was evidence that there was either familiarity or lack of actual law enforcement to prevent people who were militia-style people from showing up in the city of Snohomish during the Black Lives Matter movements.
Black Lives Matter protests in that city. And he went there supposedly to protect the city.
Right. And there was that side, the far right side was pointing to Antifa activity or any protest activity as anti-fascist or Antifa activity, when in reality, we're just individuals who are fighting for some equality, accountability, and justice. Okay. So the next question I have for you is, and we touched on this a little bit, what do you believe is one of the reasons that Trump and the largely Republican Congress was elected?
Well, I think I already said that the working class felt abandoned and switched sides. Roll the dice and say, well, we don't want to be with this party anymore. Let's roll the dice. This guy will maybe change his mode of operandus. And that's not going to happen, you know.
Great. The next question is, do you feel like you did enough to affect the election in the way you wanted to see it go?
Well, my friend, there's not much we can do but put our vote in there and you vote to vote. Outside of that, we do not have the power, and we're not granted the power to change, to affect policy. That is only done by the rich. And that's how this whole Constitution has been set up. They protect the affluency of the rich and help to maintain the working class oppressed and exploited.
Right.
And I really can't say much else about that because
Sure.
we don't have much power as working class people.
And I got to put that in context, because you've been an advocate for long enough to have seen movements make progress and then that progress get rolled back, actually fairly consistently. And what you've seen is that despite the work that's done by organizers, community, and the like, there's always someone out there who has a lot more money, thus has a lot more influence with political or elected officials who make the laws, to make all of that protest and all of that work that community does null and void. Okay.
A good example of that is pursuits legislation that was passed in 2021. And actually, 2021 was a very, very good year. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, there was people on the streets. George Floyd had just been murdered. So there was a lot of pressure to change the culture of policing. So the
Right.
use of deadly force came into play. Okay. The tear gas and batons used in protest were eliminated. And then we have members of the community become part of the commission, the Western State Commission or the Training Commission, where cops get trained, right, certified. Now we have civilians on that. There used to be all law enforcement, either former police or current police. I think they had one civilian, and I attended at least 2 or 3 of those commissions. I never saw the civilian there.
Really?
Uh-uh.
Oh, that's interesting. And speaking on the legislation that was passed on the wake of George Floyd and the protests, one of them that I was kind of a product of was the citizen oversight process when there are police use of force cases. I was a part of the Snohomish County multi-agency response team, which is a team of law enforcement officials from each city in the county that respond to police use of force cases, which are anytime a police officer uh, basically shoots somebody or seriously injures somebody. And the legislation, and I'm gonna reveal this bit, being one of the inaugural members of the citizen members or residents of that team in Snohomish County, I got to see a lot of internal workings of investigation and how things are done. It was great. It felt great at first, but it wasn't. It didn't take too long for the cracks of that work to really start to show. And even though many of the members of that team did the work to include the committee members, the citizen committee members, there were also times where decisions were made where the citizens were not notified appropriately about decisions about how that team works or how the citizen portion of that works. And there were just gaps that showed that there was a try, but there wasn't a sincere reformation of the way police use of force cases are investigated. And so, and I don't want to totally diminish that work or even the members of that team or even my work on that team, but something people need to know is that like when progress is made, it changes things, but for that change to hold and to be sustained, like it has to be supported for years. That's how institutions are made. And oftentimes, like you mentioned, there's a rich person or a coalition of people who don't want it to change that reverse that or erode the integrity of that change to the degree that that change then gets rolled back or becomes almost a nothing, right?
Well, and that's what happened with the pursuits law legislation.
Right.
The year before that law was passed in 2021, there was like 12 people that died because of pursuits by law enforcement.
Uh-huh.
Innocent bystanders, or maybe the driver of the car they were pursuing. The year after that legislation passed, there was only 3 people that died as a result of pursuits. But then law enforcement was complaining all over the place. Well, I guess we'll have to just let that guy run away with what he stole there because we cannot pursue him.
That's it.
And how many people have died here in our own county as a result of pursuits just in the last few months?
How much?
At least 4.
Okay. Okay. So I mean that's an example of how oftentimes change is undermined, right? And the change just doesn't stick. So,
But now we have as well, Louis, that passed in 2021. We're talking about the use of deadly force. Now we have the Independent Office of Investigations. Fortunately, it passed in 2021 but is yet to be put together. And I don't understand the reasons why, and nobody's been able to explain them to me yet, why it hasn't been put together. And I know there's concern by law enforcement. Well, who was part of this office? Do they have a law enforcement background? Well, they may not have the background, but obviously we can all intelligent enough to be able to decipher what's wrong and what's good, what's right. But we'll get training, of course. But anytime laws are passed, the whole police accountability, there will always be blowback from them.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's just another example of how change is undermined by the force of that be. So thank you for putting that reality into perspective, because I don't think the folks who are well-intentioned and promoting a lot of type values or policies that fought for really understand in terms of how those things are put into practice and also eroded. So thank you for bringing that to our listeners' attention.
Well, I was going to say that my next event is going to be on January 11th. I will be bringing a woman by the name of Jessica Pishko, who wrote a book called The Highest Law in the Land: The Unchecked Power of Sheriffs Threatens Democracy. And it has to do with constitutional sheriffs. It's a big movement. And I think we may have just hired another constitutional sheriff in Pierce County this time around. I forget his name right now, but from things he said already, people have told me it wouldn't surprise me that he is. I mean, we have one in Cat County who even got the Constitutional Sheriff of the Award in 2019.
Oh, what?
Constitutional Sheriff Award, the Year Award.
Well, so can we unpack that real quick? Because when you're talking about constitutional sheriff, like as an elected official, I am sworn to protect the Constitution of the United States, right? Also, police officers are made to swear they protect the Constitution of the United States. So when you say constitutional sheriff, what do you?
Let me explain to you what a constitutional sheriff is. See, a constitutional sheriff believes, because law enforcement started here with sheriffs in the early days.
Uh-huh.
We started law enforcement. And so constitutional sheriffs believe that they are the supreme authority in their county that supersedes state and federal law.
Got it.
And that's how they operate. And there's a movement going on in this country. There's a guy by the name of Richard Mack from Arizona, who was constitutional sheriff. In fact, he came here to support Adam Fortney, did a fundraiser for him back in July, whenever it was, last year. It's something that, like I said, Mr. Trump may want to nationalize the police, just like Hitler did.
That's one I haven't heard yet on this podcast. So again, thinking that the podcast is doing its job in illuminating different perspectives so that hopefully people can, one, see what's really happening, see what other people around them are thinking, and two, hopefully we'll create a pathway forward. We shall see. We shall see. But the last question I have for you, Juan, is what do you want to say to yourself 4 years in the future?
Well, I think there's a lot of people, unknown people, that do unknown things, but set the basis for historical change. And those people will have to, again, this year, start doing more of that, because they're the ones that will change what's going on in this country, in this society. You don't hear about them much, but they're there and they're doing stuff. And we need to become active again and do the things that we can at our lower level, but hopefully that it will spiral upwards and become an issue that will be addressed and make a change for the better.
Yeah. I mean, you gave me chills when you said that, Juan, because I always conceptualize the world from my perspective by so incorporating other people's perspectives. But I've always thought that I am one of those people doing that work on the local level, which is why I was working, leading from the back, if you will, in many of the organizations that I've served over the last 10 or 15 years. But you're right. Folks like myself, folks like I don't want to, I never like to put that burden on people. I like for people to be called to take up that mantle. But the point is that, yeah, now I believe now is the time. And so that's why I created this podcast, because I feel like I can do something, and I believe that it will lead somewhere where at least the version of me 4 years in the future will say, you did right by starting that podcast. But I mean, so
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I agree with what you're doing, Lewis. And I think the more voice put in your recordings, hopefully stimulate some thinking on people who have never thought about some of those things before.
well, thank you, Juan. I appreciate you as always. You are a good friend, somebody who I absolutely respect and trust in the community.
Thank you, Lewis, for the respect that you give me. I respect for you as well. And I always appreciate young people like you that are doing stuff, because youth are the ones that will change the future.
Sure.
And they have to. They have to. They have no choice.
That's right. That's right. I know it. I know it. And I am.
They do have a choice, I guess, but if you have the right thinking going on in your mind, you will believe that you need to do something.
And there's no choice. But, and I am going to conclude by saying we are all different, but we are all also the same. And what matters is we recognize that and move forward to make a better world for all of us.